Well, hello everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever in the beautiful world you are. Welcome to Aquarius Rising Africa. And I am so happy to have with me again. Uh, I want to say in the studio, it feels like my little studio, yeah, that I've just moved into recently. But very happy to have back with me the awesome Kerri Saint of Australia, who is an amazing advocate for the adoptees and adoptives and biological parents who've pretty much been forced to give their kids up for adoption over the years. So, yeah, Kerri, really good to have you back with me today. But before we go ahead, just like a big shout out to our sponsor, who is again our awesome Spooky 2, creators of the Home Rife energy system. I like to call it, as I always say, energy medicine. They create their own machines that you use yourself at home, and they start with the teeny tiny ones, and they've got an entire range of home rife machines that you can choose from. Really getting fantastic results, and just watching, people from all over the world using it on themselves, on their animals as well, is just amazing that these things are available to us now. So yeah, and if you'd like to purchase one or check out their website, there's their link is in the description, and you can use my name, Chantal. Drop that name as your coupon code to get 5% discount. Enjoy and have happy healing vibes for the rest of your life. It's amazing. So now that we've got spoken about Spooky 2, Kerri, how are you, beautiful lady? Nice to catch up with you again.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's been a very interesting little time while I've been away, and I've had attend some meetings in Brisbane to do with forced adoption, the stakeholder meeting this week, planning our anniversary event in November here in Brisbane for the anniversary. I think it's the 11th year that we had our apology for former forced adoptions in Queensland. So we're planning that event. So if anybody's in Queensland and would like to attend, that's coming up in November. So
well, you should really give us the details actually, and then we can actually post a flyer on our channel as well, just letting people know, and we can just post that on our social media platforms so that people can know what's going on. Because you and I were having a chat off air now. Just at how important it is, and I look at my other guest on the show as well, Alice Parola, who talks a lot about mental well-being. She herself was and in fact, it's so similar. We were just saying how similar the SRA trauma is as well, right? And how it coincides with the adoption, because Alice Parola herself was abused by her homosexual pedophile father, and had so much trauma, and then at the age of 12 was given up by her parents for adoption. At the age of 12, I mean, can you believe that?
Yeah.
And now has, borderline personality disorder. And, and dealing with that and really doing a fantastic job. And I really want to encourage you guys, if you haven't watched our interviews with Alice and her husband, Joe, as well, and her daughter, Nikki, comes on, they've had such a strong family bonding, such a strong family connection, and how this condition has actually brought them closer together as opposed to ripping apart.
Yeah.
So, I think there's so many correlations with what we're doing with you as well, just in terms of the adoptions and the mental trauma. And of course, that mental trauma is always going to translate at some point into physical trauma as well.
Definitely.
The body keeps the score. So later on in life, especially, that's when all sorts of health conditions start manifesting. So we always say it's so good just to speak, no trauma is too small to talk about and to share with. Because the minute we start speaking, it releases its grip. And
definitely.
We can then begin the healing process. And that's really what we want to be doing here. So
Yeah.
very happy that we are talking about these unpopular topics. People don't like to hear about these things because it means that they actually have to give a shit about
Yeah.
someone that's sitting next to them.
Yeah.
We've become so disconnected from each other, haven't we? Most office jobs are now little cubicles, where you just a number. And then, of course, since COVID, a lot of people are now working at home and online. So again, there's a lot more of that segregation and separation. And
Oh,
really, at the end
definitely.
of the day,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's what
I mean,
connection.
I've listened to a number of your interviews on different people, and I especially tune in when Jesse's speaking, and Tom Althouse. He's a really terrific guy, and he's great lot to share, and others, and I as a victim myself, I love to hear how others have managed what they've endured, and I often find many correlations between my trauma that I've experienced and what I call the shrapnel afterwards, and other victims. And and I also have other victims who reach out to me, or survivors reach out to me, and people who are going through either court cases or just reporting, and they don't know who to reach out to. There's no one around them that's experienced what they have. And sometimes I'll get little messages, they might just message me, or they might want to FaceTime, or and they just want to disconnect a bit. And I think that connection to go, I've talked to somebody who's experienced something very similar to myself, and I'm suffering the same sort of symptoms. It just settles you a bit to know that you can actually do that with somebody, even though they're across the other side of the world. And I find that
Absolutely.
really supportive and encouraging for people. And I find it encouraging for myself that when I listen to other survivors and listen to how they've managed what they've managed, and not only just the psychological and the physical, but the spiritual aspect of it, because I've had my own journey spiritually. And it's really lovely to hear other survivors speak on that and their relationship, with God, if that's the where they've gone. But I love to hear how people have managed that and how they've got that connection going, and how that's fed them through some of the worst parts of their life. Because sometimes, you may not have anyone to physically speak to, but they're building a relationship spiritually, and they're finding ways to navigate and manage what they've endured. I sort of see it that with my journey, I've kind of managed a lot of stuff on my own, but I've also had to source professional counselors. But I've also made that connection spiritually, and I kind of see it that God sends people into your life to help you. You pray and you think, well, God's going to help me, but somebody's turned up on your door, or you've met them somewhere. And you to me, I just thank God. I go, well, you've sent somebody, it wasn't what I was expecting, but I get such a blessing from it, because you just kind of know they were sent for the right time. And God uses us to do that. He wants us to reach out to each other and help each other, and I think, and comfort one another and support one another. I think that's really, really important. We can all play a role in that journey, and
Absolutely. That is so, that is the biggest thing, because so often when we're talking to people that have been traumatized, they often feel so alone, and that
yes,
no one understands, and that they've had to keep this terrible secret, right? Because they've been sworn to secrecy.
yes,
And, all of that plays a role in the trauma that they carry.
mm,
So when we start sharing and when we
yeah,
start listening to others, it gives us courage to do the
mm,
same. And
yes,
that's really what I've learned in the last I've been a healer for many years now, and I'm just talking about the last 3 years, especially with such extreme situations. The more we talk, it really does release that grip, that
yeah,
fear. And the more people who start talking, the more people listen. And that's
mm,
really what we need to be doing here. People are aware that this stuff is going on. They just don't think it's affecting them.
Yes.
but without realizing everyone else's trauma in life is actually your trauma,
Yeah.
because we're all in this together. And if we're
Mm.
going to ignore traumatic situations and pretend it's not our business, and that person must go and deal with their own shit, I can't tell you how many times I hear that. Oh my God,
Yeah.
go deal with your own shit. Like,
Yeah.
I can't be dealing with that. I
Yeah.
hear this all the time from people. They don't know how I do what I do, because people must just go deal with their own shit,
Mm.
and it's really, I hear that all the time. So I think the time for that is over. And that's what we were just saying off air as well. So important. And what we really want to do, and I want to really reach out to the viewers here, we want to start interviewing more people that have either
Mm.
been, that are adoptees, been adopted, or or is a parent, a mother or a father, actually. I think we assume that the mothers have a lot more trauma than the fathers, but do we know that for sure?
Mm.
I've seen so many stories about men who have maybe their woman or their girlfriend or their wife is pregnant and she will not let them see the child. I mean, I've seen men go to pieces because of that. You know what I'm
Mm.
saying? So there's that loss for men as well. So really, just people in general who are wanting to start this, get the wheel turning, the ball in motion, so to speak, to start speaking about your experiences
Mm.
and how it has been for you. So, yep, here we go. Prince is saying he's adopted. I'd
Prince
love
just
to
said,
know.
yeah, he's adopted. Yes, there's
Yeah.
there's a new podcast that started. It's called The Secrets We Keep, and the lady that started, it's here in I think it's Australia anyway, but um, she saw a photo of her mother holding a baby, and because her mother had passed away, and she was going through all this old photos, and she saw this baby and she knew it wasn't her. So it started her journey into wanting to know who this baby was, and it led her down a path to think perhaps her mother had given a baby up for adoption. Something had happened. So anyway, she finds out she's not, like, that never happened, but what it did was it took her on a journey where she discovered forced adoption, and she discovered all these stories. So she started a podcast, and it's been getting a lot of attention through the mainstream media. And it's called The Secrets We Keep. So I can't remember the lady's name that's actually started it, but if people want to check it out, it's not
Yeah,
just
that's
about adoption, but it was by believing that perhaps her mother um, had this baby and was maybe forced to give it up, led her accidentally to discover forced adoption. And it's quite interesting. We've had Senate inquiries, state and federal apologies, and yet this lady didn't know anything about forced adoption. So, and it's been like 10, 11 years since we had our federal apology. So, even in Australia in itself, and we're probably the first country, we've led the way in really exposing forced adoption and apologising and trying to set up forms of either compensation or redress or help and support. There's funding for post-adoption resource services. And yet, there are thousands and thousands of people in this country still don't know. So what's happening in other countries around this issue? I know Ireland is desperately trying very hard to get the information out. Britain is the same thing. America has a horrific history of forced adoption, and it also still has so many children being taken for adoption. But Australia in itself, because the work, like myself and many others, we lobbied and we were successful in getting state and federal apologies. However, we've still had lots of roadblocks by politicians in particular, and particular government departments in achieving all the recommendations from the Senate inquiry. So I'd like to hang up my hat and retire from lobbying, but it doesn't seem to happen that way. And, you know,
sorry.
yeah, I know it's scary, but I got to tell you, I had someone had to come out to my home to fix something. I didn't know the gentleman, and it just shows you when in my brain when I think I'm just getting so tired and I due to hang up my hat, and it's like the universal God just sends me somebody to slap me across the ears to go, don't go anywhere. And this gentleman had to come in and fix something in my home. And he wasn't even in the door 2 seconds when he started going, it's really tough at the moment. I adopted a daughter when she was 11 months old from such and such. And, I've had, like problems from day one and don't know what to do. And I kind of stood there and took this gasp. And I was like, do I say anything? Like, I didn't know what to say. I was like, do I say anything or not? And I finally had to say something to him because I just felt so bad. He just felt like he was really struggling. And I ended up telling him some resources, and he now has my phone number. I'm like, if you need any help, please give me a call. But it happens a lot. I completely get sideswiped every time I get a bit discouraged. Every time I get a bit like, I'm tired, maybe I need to hang up my hat, I will get phone calls. I will get calls from government. I will get someone reach out, or someone go, we're interested in doing a documentary, or we'd like to do this. And I'm like, oh, man. So I just say to God, just keep giving me the energy and keep my little cogs going, because I do get exhausted. I do get tired because you don't always get a welcoming response from our governments. And there's always the propaganda out there that's always in your face, pushing adoption. And you do get a bit discouraged. So, so...
The right folk always show up at the right time, don't they?
Yeah.
Exactly. But what Prince is saying, well, Kerri, is talking about the natives. And I know that in Australia as well, with Aboriginal children, and I know, in South Africa as well with African kids. And I know that the Native American kids as well, they've gone through that horrible freaking system. Also with kind of, I don't want to say stealing kids. It's not stealing kids, but making sure that the kids are adopted into different families, more the Mason families, because really these kids are highly gifted. And they get used for all sorts of nefarious things. And that's a very real thing. We can never, ever actually undermine that, because the more we're looking into these things, the more we're seeing how that's happening and how it has happened. So anytime someone's adopted a whole bunch of First Nation kids, I would definitely be asking some questions about those people for sure. Yes. Selling them, That's all. I think I mentioned it before. We're looking at in South Africa in the hospitals. It was certainly. They were doing like a media press release thing on it, where they did investigations into the hospitals, and many of the kids they found were like twins. They'd be told the one twin is dead. Or babies are dead, or whatever the case might be, and they literally get trafficked. They get trafficked to Europe, America. They get used for organ harvesting, for SRA, and it's very real. And then that's all part of this. We can never forget that, because these things are happening, and it happens very much under the auspices of adoption, right?
Yes.
We're giving kids a good home. We're making sure they have food on their table.
Yeah. When I gave evidence, when I got involved in the Senate inquiry, they really just thought it was going to be about the mums, and that the mums were going, because it was horrific what happened to them in the hospitals. And in our last interview, we went through a bit of a role play where I kind of exposed a bit on how that would have happened. And thank you, Chantel, for offering yourself up for that.
That was quite hectic, I have to tell you. That was bloody hectic to put yourself, and I hope the viewers did it too, especially women out there, who because we carry our babies, they grow inside of us. It's a living, there's no, you can't explain it to someone who's not had a child.
Yeah.
And then suddenly when that happens, and and you know what I was thinking then as well, because I did have the privilege of, when my son was born, of him being placed on my chest.
Yeah.
And I remember it being such a surreal feeling, but I was trying to compare what someone, as you say, who's not even seeing the child. It gets taken and all sorts of horrible things, and you don't even get to see the baby. So I'm trying to, from the moment that I had my son compared to what you were talking about.
Yeah.
Very, very hectic. Very hectic to go through that.
And that was the thing, that most of the mothers assumed they would take their babies home just because they were put in a lot of the girls' homes, and many of the mothers were, average age was 19. So we're not talking about really, really young girls. That's untrue. That's the media telling everybody that these were promiscuous, really young girls. No, these were women who, because of the era, had to be 21 to be an adult, and that they were still under the authority of their parents. And if they had a brief relationship, or were even in a long-term relationship, and the parents didn't like who they were with, they were sent away to these institutions and treated abysmally by the nuns in these institutions, and made to work in the laundries and denied a great deal. And the psychological impact was already happening inside those laundries. But those girls just thought at a lot of point that they'll have their baby and they'll leave, because many of them had jobs and careers. They thought that they'd get out with their baby. So when we went through what we did last time, I wanted to try and shift people in the sense that you're expecting this baby. Yes, it's tough at the moment and you have some fears, but you're expecting to take that baby away. You would never imagine that another human being would treat you so cruel and so horrifically to actually take your own baby from you. But they did do that. So I've actually got some paintings by, and I hope I can show these all right, the lady called Jan Cashin, who shared, she's a mum who had her child stolen. She was actually engaged to the father, and she was sent away by her parents because her father was well-to-do, and so it was inappropriate. She was 21 and she was sent away to an institution, and she wanted to run away, and they threatened her with the police. She wanted to go to her grandmother, so she was forced, and then she was sent to the hospital. And she said, "This is the nurse." So she's painted the image of the nurse that smiled at her. Wrong way. She smiled at her, and that was the look she got. And then, as she's giving birth, this is the next thing that happens to her. So remember when I said to you, your hands are tied? So this is what happened to her. So the nurse smiles, this beautiful smile, and then next minute her hands are tied to the bed, and then there are sheets or pillows placed on her stomach. And the reason that they did that, so here's another image. So here's a sheet placed over so she can't see what's happening. And the reason that, do you see that okay?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the reason they did that was because there was the belief that if mum made eye contact with the baby and vice versa, the bonding started at that point, when the bonding had already started in utero.
Totally. I mean, who thinks it doesn't start in utero?
Yeah.
I mean, any person with two brain cells will realize that, of course, it does. But wow, that's crazy.
Yeah. So I think that came out of Freud, Freud's concept and beliefs that that basically the connection began once they made eye contact. So here's a depiction of I don't think this is herself. It may be, but this is an image that I want to give. And think back to when we did that role play and how you actually felt, Chantel. You were talking about how powerless you felt. And this is the image that she gives of herself when her baby is taken. Absolutely distraught at having her child taken from her. So her artwork is brilliant and depicts, and she feels like, this is that she's absolutely gone mad by having her child taken. I don't know if you're familiar with the image of the scream. It's a very famous painting of a man who's sort of holding his ears and he's just screaming. That was, into the void. And this is very similar. So this is of a woman being held down by nurses while she's giving birth.
Wow.
So,
Crazy. Freud.
Yeah.
Freud fraud, yes. Freud fraud.
Yeah. It says here it was painted by a particular woman. I won't name her. Both arms tied to the bed by bandages and with a nurse either side of her pushing down her shoulders and elbows so she couldn't see her baby, and the bed linen tied tightly, squashing her while she tried to give birth. She said she realised the enormity of the crimes of hospital staff in every state. This particular mother was threatened with deportation if she didn't submit quietly and surrendered her baby. So that depicts, I know this woman who the painting's painted after, and when she found herself pregnant because she was a 10-pound pom, she was threatened with deportation if she tried to fight for her baby. Here's another image. So here's an image of got that way. Of the mother that has her it's totally empty in her stomach. So these are by the very victims themselves, these paintings. So
yeah. Move it a little bit across, Kerri, to your left. Just
okay.
Move, Kerri. Don't you just want to show the image again? Yeah. A little bit up to your left. To your left. Move it to your left. Yeah.
That's my right. Yes. So, yeah.
Your left. Your left. Your left.
Yep. It's all right.
Here we go. Wow.
There you go. So you can see, and the depiction of,
I just sit here, and I can't even begin to imagine what that must be like, because when we're hearing so much of this, and then of course we know they've got these breeder programs in which kids are just being bred and just babies being ripped away. And
so here's another image of a mother with her hand tied, and she's just absolutely distraught.
Sure. What book is that?
This is Women's Adoption Stories in Australia from 1960 to 1995.
Is that book available? Is it available on Amazon?
I don't know. I'd have to find out. I know the author of this. She's done the artwork. I use some of her artwork in my booklet to do with the songs about forced adoption. There's one here which it's to do with what she calls Carramar babies, because it was the Carramar home for delinquent girls in New South Wales. And this is the image that she put together to depict what happened to the babies. And she believes that this image was kind of stolen by a very famous or well-to-do Disney movie. So it's all the babies.
Other side, to your left, More. And lift it up a bit. There we go, better.
So that's all the babies. She in her mind just been taken away for adoption. And as you can see, the babies have no eyes, and the babies' mouths are all open and screaming. It's quite a striking back that way. A strong image.
Yeah, very much so.
So
amazing what one can express through art, right?
Wow. Just such powerful artwork. And Jan was taught by a very well-known or very famous Australian artist. Like she was a teacher at the time her baby was stolen, and she was engaged to marry the father. She eventually went on to marry the father and have other children to him, and she was 21 years old, and she's still alive today, so she's in her 80s, and she's still experiencing the trauma, never had an ounce of compensation for what happened to her.
But did she not? Was she ever able to find her child? Did she try to find her child?
Yes, she met her son, and unfortunately, like many reunions, do not work out well because of the damage to adoptees that many of the mums didn't realise had happened, and because adoptees are told all these lies about the mothers, and we're brainwashed to think that we were just given away like garbage and weren't wanted. So when you go to make contact, it's extremely hard for many of them to work. It's not for the want of trying, but there's so much trauma from both sides. And like many of the mums say, I was forced to give up, or my baby was taken and I'm given back a man. And it's very hard for them to connect to this grown man and adult because they're still seeing that baby that they imagined in their mind
Absolutely.
that they had. So it's very difficult. I know with my own mother, I attempted 3 times to build a relationship with her, but it kept falling down. And unbeknownst to me, at the time, I didn't know the true story of what she went through. It took nearly 20 years for me to find out what she experienced, because she was holding this secret about how she was treated. I didn't know that social workers would show up at her home. My mother was 34 and had 4 boys to raise because her husband had been killed in an accident, and she'd had a brief affair with my father. And unfortunately, the minute that doctors found out that she was pregnant, welfare was on her doorstep, and they would just show up unannounced and threaten her and make her feel like the scum of the earth, and to basically tell her that if she didn't give me up for adoption, her other children would be taken from her. So I didn't know that for many, many years. She just said, well, life was tough and I had to make a choice. And it wasn't until many years later, and where I started really having these conversations with the mothers in the Senate inquiry, my aha moment was like, oh my goodness, like my mum's probably experienced this. So I actually had to ask my mum the question, that I was aware of the more horrific nature of forced adoption. And that's when she said, yes, that's what's happened to me. And never, even up to the day she died, she never had an ounce of counselling.
Wow. So to carry that within you as a mother, and to take, it's such a accumulation of emotions, and it's just really sad that you guys weren't able to have that conversation earlier.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I'm currently writing my book, and I'm revisiting those initial contact, how I found my mother. And because I was told that my mum was 16 and died giving birth to me and never wanted me. So I was going on that story when I started searching. And on my wedding day, I was 18. My adopted mother gave me my adoption papers. And on my adoption papers had my mother's full name. And so after I settled in, into married life, I was keen. I mean, I just wanted to find where my mother was buried. I believed my mum was dead. And I started searching in cemeteries, ringing up, and wasn't having any luck. And then I decided, well, I'll apply for a death certificate, go to births, deaths and marriages. And at first they're like, well, yeah, we can do this for you. Send in some money, send in your adoption papers, because I had to verify I was adopted and she was my mother. And about a few weeks after that, I get a letter back from births, deaths and marriages telling me I'm not entitled to any information about my mother because I'm adopted. I'm not allowed to know. And I was speechless. I went, what do you mean I'm not allowed to know? I'm like 19 at this stage, and I'm like, I'm an adult. Like, how can I don't get it. Like, could you imagine not being allowed to know about your own parents? So I actually rang them up and spoke to a gentleman who was just kept reiterating you're allowed to have it. And I demanded to speak to someone above them, because at first they said yes, and now they're saying no. And they're telling me there's a law that denies me the right to know whether my mother is dead or alive. And I'm going, law? What do you mean there's a law? How? I don't get it. So I got quite upset. And the gentleman finally said, what if she's remarried? He said it in a very sort of, I must have obviously stirred him up a bit. And I responded, oh, it's not that you don't want to, you can't tell me you don't want to. And I hung up on the poor man. And then I was really worked up and really upset. And then next to me, I was playing the conversation over and over in my head. And I kept hearing, what if she's remarried? And then all of a sudden, this realization happens that they've looked and they found my mother is still alive. That could be the only reason they're not telling me. So all of a sudden, light bulbs come on, and I go, she's alive. She has to be alive.
He was actually telling you to go look, right?
Yeah.
That's the way I would read that.
I don't know whether he did it on purpose or whether I just got him a bit worked
Somebody did it.
So I ended up going through Salvation Army. They had like a missing persons unit, and I told them that I was adopted. I asked them, would they do it? And they said yes. And I gave them her name, and they'd actually found her within weeks. And I had assumed that by working out my mum was possibly 16 when she gave birth to me. I'm now 19. So, she's in her 30s, but they find her and find out she's 55. And my brain's going, so I'm trying to adjust to all this new information within 6 months of my first conversation with births, deaths, and marriages. And I'm being told, your mother was not 16 and died giving birth to you. She was a 35-year-old widow with 4 children, and she's now 55 years old. I'm having to adjust. And then I'm going, who lied to me? Did my adoptive mother choose to lie to me, or was this something she was told to tell me? And in writing my story and revisiting all that, I'm realizing that I then had to keep a secret from my adoptive parents and family that I was doing this search, because I was terrified of copping backlash and having interference in what I wanted to do. And then I realized by the conversations I'd had with my biological mother that she was going to keep me a secret still from anybody else. And her mother knew I existed, but nobody else did. And at first I was like, what do you mean you're going to keep me a secret? I felt offended she was keeping me a secret, but I also had to keep her secret. So for 2 years, we corresponded with each other and not letting anybody know that we were doing this. And eventually, after 2 years, I managed to maneuver a way to go and see her in person. And I was taking my 3-year-old daughter with me. And I knew if I don't say something to my adopted mother, my daughter's going to come home and say something. So I had a meeting with my adopted mother, sat her down and was trying to be very sensitive to her. And because I'm working on the premise that she was told a lie about my mum. Like, she doesn't know that she's not dead. So I was trying to be really, really sensitive to her feelings. Didn't want her to feel rejected or threatened by me. I just wanted to know who my biological mother was. At that point, I wasn't overly interested in finding a new mother. I wanted my truth. And of course, I told my mum, my adoptive mother, my mother was not dead. She was very much well alive. And all of a sudden, my adoptive mother just exploded and started screaming at me, "You are not my daughter. I do not love you. Get out and don't come back." And it absolutely gutted me. It just about wrecked me. I couldn't believe that was the response that I got.
Wow.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
must say that even shocks me to hear that was her response. So, I mean, I'm assuming things didn't go too well after that.
I still went. I went for a period of time, and I actually got to meet my 4 half brothers and their wives and children for the first time. But the whole time I was there, I was assuming that I didn't have an adoptive mother or family to go back to. But it was so strong in me to want to know my biological family and to know my truth that I was prepared to allow that relationship to implode. That I was
Yeah.
so driven that I was willing to walk on glass and willing to be verbally abused and beaten and battered to actually find my truth. And this is what society and many adoptive parents need to understand. It's not that you want to replace your adoptive parents. You desperately need to know and understand your identity and your truth of who you are.
DNA. I
Yeah,
agree.
it's
I
so
agree.
important. And you know, it's so hard. I think if you could put yourself in, and that's why I did that little exercise with you last time to try and put you in the same shoes as the mother. And I haven't yet worked out how do I put people in the same shoes as the adoptee. And we kind of come close to it a little bit during when COVID was on, when we got the government saying you're not allowed to go visit your family. You can't
Mm,
go. You have a mum and dad that are dying or a grandparent. You're not allowed at the hospital. You can't go. You can't hold them. You can't touch them. You can't talk to them. You can't go to the
yeah,
funeral. That
absolutely.
that comes close to how an adopted person feels, because you have society and government and laws, because we had veto laws here in Australia that if you tried to make contact with your biological mother, that you could go to jail for 6 years.
Wow. That's insane.
Yeah, so that only changed 1991, something like that. We
Yeah.
lobbied to have that changed. And so if I can get it anywhere close, for people who are listening to this who aren't adopted, who experienced what our society did to us through COVID and how it made you feel, you will get some close understanding of what it
A
is to be
little
an
bit.
adopted person.
Yeah. Kerri, we're just gonna I actually wanna ask you some further questions around actually your adopted mom, but we're just gonna take a little bit of an ad break here for the moment and just let our show promo play, and we'll be right back.
Hi everyone, my name is Shawna Ray Chambers, and I discovered Spooky on the internet. I was introduced to Rife through some family members, and then wanted to get a machine, having been diagnosed with Non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. So I found Spooky too, and I thought it was affordable, so I decided to give it a try. I started out with buying the Generator X Pro startup kit, which was awesome, but then that turned into buying a couple other generators, just regular generators, because the healing benefits were so amazing for not just me, but for my children. Some of the little stories, my kids are younger, they are always getting runny noses and bringing something home, and using the frequency machines is just knocking it out within hours, and it's just incredible. As far as the Non-Hodgkin's, I'm still working on it. I'm currently have a central with the plasma tube in my shopping cart because I'm ready to up the power, but I'm connected to the TENS pads as we speak, in which I'm doing a couple hours a day and doing remote healing. So it's just been such a wonderful experience. It feels so good. It seems intimidating in the beginning, but it's really very easy. As soon as, I overcame the fear, everything just makes sense. You get it, you set it up, and, every day you can learn something new. Overcoming the Fear is another program I used to overcome some major fears in my life, which was amazing. Energy to go to work. I mean, every day I'm plugging in a different program, and every day it's just surprising me. It is one of the most amazing things for healing that I've found.
I'm just actually looking at some of the comments here, and Prince is saying again, where there are no secrets, there can be no lies. That's so true. So there's no secrets, there can be no lies. So best we don't keep secrets.
Definitely.
But I'm a little bit, I'm fascinated by what Zamek 13 says. I always wanted to be adopted, as I thought it would make the chosen one. I'm 55 now, in my early 40s. I started to look into adoption, decided against it when I realized it could enable trafficking. Well, I'm not sure about the trafficking side. Okay, I'm not sure how adopting a child can enable trafficking, but I find it interesting that you wanted to be a chosen one. I haven't heard that before.
I can answer that one for you, Shanti. Enabling trafficking. But yes, I agree.
No, I understand. No, hang on. But then explain that to me, because obviously I understand that through adoption, trafficking obviously occurs under the guise or under the ruse of adoption. But if I want to adopt a baby and I'm able to adopt a baby, why would that enable trafficking? That's what I'm saying. I'm not understanding that.
You're supporting a system that is very traumatic. And look, there's a lot of talk around whether we even need adoption, and we definitely need children to be placed in homes where they're loved and supported. I think the idea of what we call plenary adoption is horrific and criminal in every respect to the adoptee. And plenary adoption is when we change the identity of their child and wipe their identity, and they're given a new birth certificate, and there's no oversight, there's no accountability. So if it goes wrong, so unfortunately, like America, adoption is used for trafficking of children because it's unregulated. So when we dig a bit deeper, and like this Zamek 13 has said, when you dig deeper, you actually realize that like many things that look really good
Or not.
and to realize that nefarious people use things for nefarious purposes.
And I think obviously, and as we're discovering more and more how much the system has used adoption to cover up their own corruption. I agree. It is a system that needs to be cleaned up in a massive way. But, and as you say, children do need loving homes. And I know some adoption stories that are really beautiful. Really, one of my best friends, I told the story, an Indian girl, and you don't, I don't know, in anywhere else, but in South Africa, you are seldom going to find Indian babies up for adoption because the families usually take care of them, and they're Indian couple. And by the luck of God, right, they got an Indian baby to be adopted. And this child, their birthdays, I think the husband and wife, 4 or 5 days apart. This baby was born in the middle of their birthdays. So their birthdays all, and I mean, she looks, she's 10 now. She looks exactly like they do. I mean, it's like she's a carbon copy of her adoptive mom. So I look at stories like that, and I know there are really beautiful stories, right? And those are more of what we want, as opposed to what you've experienced and so many countless other people. There really are, you know. I always say, your child is my child. If your child's in trouble, I'm going to do what I can to help them. Because
Yeah.
if my child was in trouble, I would want you to do the same. A child is a child, right? And
Yeah.
we want to, it takes a village to raise a child. So let's all just be part of the village, you know, be the crones of the village.
Yeah. You were going to ask me a question about my adoptive mother.
Yes. I find it interesting what you were saying, despite your history with your adoptive parents, right? Because you've mentioned before what you went through. And just for purposes of context, for those who might not have seen this, Kerri was adopted by a family, and you were a redhead with a little club foot, so you were already graded a B grade baby. I mean, that's appalling. And at the age of 5, sent to work in the charcoal mines, right? And along that came a lot of abuse, sexual abuse, all sorts of disgusting things. And I find it interesting that even though you experienced that with them, when the time came that you could meet your biological mom and you wanted to, you sought out your adoptive mom, and of course, I think that's a beautiful thing to do, that you would go and speak to her first. But obviously, she had that explosion with you, and it really, what you were saying, broke your spirit for a while there. Well, not your spirit, that can't be broken, but broke you for a while there. It's interesting. Would you put that down to some type of trauma bonding that you experienced with them as well? So despite the abuse, despite the lies, despite everything else that you went through, she was still able to have that effect on you when you discovered that you wanted to see your bio mom. I'm interested just to understand your psychological...
Okay, yeah, definitely. And it's taken me long time to work out why I have had this said to me, I tolerated too much abuse from both adoptive parents and stayed extremely loyal to them, extremely loyal, and seemed to overly care for their emotional and physical needs. And, you know, if a stranger treated me that way, you know, they would have, the things they did, they would have gone to jail. But because they were my adopted parents, there were leeway and excuses, and there was just, you know, giving into it. And there was, you know, always paramount that in my brain, it was like, I can't hurt them. And whether that was society also telling me that I needed to be grateful to be adopted, that these are my saviors, and regardless of how they were treating me, I must continue to treat them this way. And so I was walking on eggshells all the time with them. And it was paramount that I go and tell my adoptive mother in the most gentle manner, so that I was taking care of all her needs, right? Reassure her I'm not going anywhere, that, you know, I don't love my biological mother any more than her and all this. But straight away she was into, it was about her. She never wanted to see why it was important for me to make that connection. She immediately was angry and more than implying that I was selfish and self-centered and ungrateful.
She was about to be exposed, right? She was about to be exposed.
Yes. And so I don't know, I won't know, like, I've had some real questions around whether my biological mother and my adoptive mother actually met in person. I suspect they did, and I suspect, because it was a private adoption, and I suspect that my biological mother knew my adoptive parents and had set it up, because up until 1964 in Australia, we had what was known as private adoptions. In 1964, the government ceased private adoptions and took over. And it's very interesting that once the government got involved in adoptions exasperated exponentially, right? Which was very interesting. Prior to that, the numbers were reasonably low. But because my adoptive mother kept telling me that I looked like my biological mum, that I was small, that I had red hair, that I had similar features. And I thought that's what she was told. But when I found my biological mother, she told me that when she lived with her husband in Brisbane, and where her husband worked was the same place my adoptive father worked. And my adoptive father was a Freemason. So it's quite possible that her husband was a Freemason and connected to the same work. So when her husband died, she went back up to Townsville, which is like an 18-hour train ride from where I live, and she stayed with the family. And 4 years later, she had a relationship with my father and fell pregnant. But she came down to Brisbane to give me up for adoption to the very people that seemed to have had a connection, was in the same area, worked in the same type of job. So did they meet? And when I approached my mother, when I finally told her, it took me, 2004, to finally tell my mother that I'd been abused. It took me over 20 years to tell her because I didn't want to crush her. Here I am. This is typical of an adoptee, to take care of everybody else's needs before your own. You don't have any needs, right? So for 20 years, I didn't want to crush my biological mum and tell her that I had a horrific childhood. So I didn't talk about my childhood until the Senate inquiry came up, and I finally kind of spilled my guts to her, and her first response is, well, that couldn't have happened. It was a private adoption. So on my brain's going, oh, hang on a minute. Did you know my parents? Did you think they were okay? Like, why would you, like, there were just all these questions that I sort of thought, and I'll never know the answer to. Never, like now, I'll never know the answer to it because my adoptive mother passed away and my biological mum passed away. But it's so hard because as an adopted person, you're kept in the dark for so long. You're lied to every step of the way, and the government lies to you. And then you find a little snippet here, a little snippet there, and you're piecing it together. And you're getting, I'm 61 this year, and I still don't know the complete truth. And,
it makes, what you're saying, that's the reason I asked you the question, about that in the beginning, because it's exactly what I believe anyway. You're taken in, we're going back to right at the time of birth where you still for 10 months, call it a year, connected to your mum by the umbilical cord, right? Yeah. So that's severed, you get put into traumatic situation, like it being in a tumble dryer type thing. You never really find your footing, and trying to seek that approval from everyone, right? And especially the ones that abused you the most.
Yes.
And it's very interesting, that again, you have that, is it called the Stockholm syndrome? I think it is.
I brought that up at the Senate inquiry, and I was probably the first one to throw it at the committee and the government, that I felt that adoptees like myself was suffering a form of Stockholm syndrome because we were staying strongly loyal to adoptive parents who were horrifically abusing us. And I couldn't fathom it because when all my memories came out, because I had like 40 years of memories. It took me 40 years for all the abuse to start coming out. And it dawned on me that, why was I so loyal to these people? Like, how can you get treated so horrifically and have these, want to care for them and watch out for them and love them and worry about, like my adoptive mother tried to commit suicide, and here I am trying to save her life. But when I was suicidal, there wasn't even a phone call. There wasn't even a visit to the hospital. There was nothing. It was cold as. But when she was suicidal, I was doing everything I could to save her life, because we've been conditioned that we owe them. We've been saved. And I didn't know that these mothers, and my mother was forced and threatened and belittled and harassed and cruelly pushed into relinquishing us. Some of us were physically, forcibly taken from our mothers. Others were, so beaten up by knowing that the baby's going to be taken, they just capitulated. And, I didn't know these things. And I was told that my mum was 16, tried to do a backyard abortion on me because she didn't want me. So I finally have these two people, and even though they're treating me horribly, it's like, when somebody is kidnapped by somebody and tortured and sexually abused, and you're totally relying on that person for food, for some sort of warmth, for a bed, for water to sustain your life. And this is what's happening, what happened to me in my adopted parents' home, was you would have those times where you're being abused, but then you're reliant upon them for food and shelter and clothing and an education and everything. It distorts everything about yourself and the world and how you navigate relationships. And then on top of it, you've got society enforcing this is the way you're meant to be treated because you're adopted. So it's a miracle that I've come out to share my story the way I do, and to be able to look back at that abuse and share it with you here the way that I do, because it should have killed me. It should have, the worst scenario should have applied to me with either, choosing to end my life, or drugs or alcohol, or just, non-functional, mentally, just really a mess. So I'm able to articulate these things, and that's, I suppose, made me the right type of person to be able to educate government and services to get them to really comprehend, because I know there are many, many other adoptees that cannot do that because of the damage that's been done to them. Why I've come out the other side as intact as I am, I don't know. I don't know why me. I don't know why I've become the person that's most vocal about the trauma to adopted people. I'm grateful that I can do it, and I probably put some weight into it that as a very young girl, I feel as if God reached out to me and I reciprocated, and it's been an on-off relationship for many years, and I've had to learn to trust and grow, and he's helped me to understand why I tick the way I do, and why some things have happened spiritually, and the bigger picture, of the spiritual realm of this world and the evil. And it's certainly helped in respect to listening to Jessie Zabota speak and others speak on your channel, to help grasp those deeper levels of it. We're not just fighting human flesh and blood, we're fighting something greater than that. And that's, so I could probably say about part of it,
It's so true. It's so true what you're saying. We're not fighting flesh and blood. We're fighting an invisible force that is very powerful. Yeah. And if we allow it to consume us, it will. That's really bottom line here. And this is why, where it says in the Bible, the truth shall set you free. It really does. This is how we set ourselves free. Yeah. And, Kerri, I want to just say thank you so, so much for sharing your story. I know, you bring so much light to these topics. And, I've particularly enjoyed listening to you speak about your experience with your adoptive parents as well. And as we say, that Stockholm syndrome that I think is prevalent in so many of these cases without we even realizing it, and that's okay, because at the end of the day, as you say, they were your only sense of security. You didn't have anyone or anything. And because you had to be grateful, you also were prepared to put up with the abuse. And that is so traumatizing to a child's mind. And I shudder to think how many kids didn't make it through. Yeah. But I'm so happy that you are here for those who have made it through, because I think it's wonderful that this path is opening. And again, I'm going to put it out there for the viewers that if any of you have stories to tell around being adopted or being an adoptive parent or a parent that was forced to have your child taken away and what that was for you, we really need to start talking about these things.
Yeah.
So on a much broader scale. And I'm glad you're saying, sorry, just give me the name of that podcast again, because I'd actually like.
The Secrets We Keep.
I'm just going to put it in here, because I think it would be a nice one for the viewers to actually go and watch themselves. The Secrets We Keep.
And I'm just noticing Irene Plants, she goes, talk about the programming, and it's so true. It was a form of programming in such a insidious level, and I had no idea how programmed I was to operate out of the way I did, and it had such an effect in my marriage and my children. And I've had to, I listen to people who are SRA and gone through MK Ultra and everything, and I hear their stories and I see the correlations. I absolutely see it. And I also have experienced the spiritual level of those programmings by certain words and stuff, and the demonic influences that come with that. And I know that the first time that I tried to speak and go public, there was almost like there was a death switch in me, that the minute I opened my mouth, I was going to die. And I've heard other survivors speak of that there's, if you get out of line or something starts to happen, you have this death switch. And that's what happened to me. And I've had to fight it for many years. It's absolutely horrible.
Do you think that's where your suicidal tendencies in the past would possibly have come from?
Oh, definitely. I had so many close encounters with, my adoptive father almost ending my life. But when my mum was pregnant, she wanted to have an abortion, right? Because I didn't find out till 2004 that she'd had another child 4 years before me taken from her. I didn't know that I met my mum when I was 21, and it took until that was 1982, something like that. And then I'm finding out in 2004 that she had another child taken. And then when I was hearing the stories of the mums and what they endured, I realized that why my mum sought an adoption. And I didn't take it personally, but it made me understand why I had this inner voice in me that wanted to keep ending my life. Because my mum had basically cursed me by not wanting to give birth to me, right? So she actually went to the doctors and wanted to have an abortion. And for 9 months, she lived in absolute abject fear that her other boys would be taken. So it helped me to understand when I first made the connection why that was there. And I went through an experience where I understand I didn't want to be born because I knew I was going to be separated from my mother. And at first, when I realized it, I was a bit gobsmacked, because I know that I was a forceps baby, and I have a scar inside of my head because my adopted mother had told me they had to pull me out. When I had the experience of understanding that I didn't want to be born, I now realize why I was a forceps baby. In the womb, I knew that I did not want to be born because I knew I was going to be separated. And
Absolutely.
So some years ago, I wrote a piece that went viral amongst survivors of adoption about my understanding of why adoptees are 4 times more likely to suicide than non-adopted people. And I made that connection, that being in the womb and when they separate us so brutally, because in that 9 months, your mother is your life, that your heart beats. We talked about that in the last interview, like the importance of mum. You don't see yourself as being a separate being. When they rip you away, you think you're going to die. You literally feel you're screaming. You mentioned how your baby screamed. It was feed time. 5 minutes out of feed time, it's screaming horrifically. So I was separated and put into a ward in the hospital for nearly 2 weeks before I was adopted. So how often did I scream and scream and scream for my mother? And with every scream, I thought I was going to die because she was my life force. So here's all these little, so when you're dealing with this essence of understanding that being suicidal is deeper than just, a head thing, it's spiritual, and there's spiritual things connected to it. Mine wasn't just on one level. It was knowing that my mother wanted to abort me. And then I had to also deal with the bit where I was separated from her and I almost died. And then I also had to deal with the fact that my adoptive father tried to kill me. So here's 3 significant impacts of death at such a young age. And, I couldn't understand it. As a mum, I was working, I had a great job, great marriage, and I would get these overwhelming, all of a sudden, just pull out in front of a truck or go off a cliff or go and jump off the Gateway Bridge. And I couldn't understand why I was so incensed. I needed to end my life. And it became more evident the minute that I spoke publicly, the minute I actually reached out and wrote about what had happened to me to the government officials. I ended up in hospital 2 hours later, absolutely terrified I was going to die, because I had spoken verbally of what had happened to me. So
Wow. There must have been some type of programming, like structured or official programming there. I mean, I understand obviously with kids, they don't have to go through like official SRA to be DID'd, right? We know that. I mean, just the mere fact that a child is traumatized will DID them.
Yeah.
But it's like what you say, the what did you call it? The suicide or the death? What did you call it? You mentioned a word earlier on that they call it the death. If you talk, you die, or you think you're going to die.
Yeah, it's like a death switch. A death switch.
Yes, death switch. So that seems to me, and I'd be interested to know if any of the viewers in the comment section have actually more information on that, because it makes a lot of what you're saying true. And especially if your father was programming, or your father was abusing you to the point that he killed you literally a few times and somehow you survived, that there would possibly have been, in my mind, it would have been something that was programmed into you. That not just, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, I don't know. See, I know he's a Freemason. I don't know how high it was. And I know that some of the rituals and may have been, what's the word for it? So, they go through their own rituals, and then how much of it was I exposed to, either officially or unofficially. But I always see it this way, and what I've learned and is that all this abuse has one author, and that author is demonic, right? So, he has a game plan. He has his own rule book, and so that's why I think you get those similarities between people who have been abused by their parents or adopted parents or whatever will have similar traits as people who abused in more structured torture and trauma and MK Ultra and SRA. Do you understand what I'm saying? Because the author of all of it, there's only one, and it's demonic. And I think that there's a playbook, and it is meted out in different ways for different, and it has the same impact. And that's what I've come to understand by reading by other survivors and listening to their stories, and then weighing up, because when they're talking, and then I'm looking back at my own journey going, oh, that's exactly what I went through. But I didn't go through this, official, CIA, MK Ultra stuff. But the experiences are almost exactly alike in the results at the end of the day. But I had my adoptive parents and the conditioning in a different way through society, through a forced adoption. And if we really look into forced adoption was a eugenics program. They knew what they were doing when they were separating us. They were deliberately causing the trauma. There were men and women in high places within the churches, within the hospitals, within psychology, with whatever. They knew exactly what they were doing. Somebody knew what they were doing, but there were minions doing the jobs, right?
Absolutely.
And so when you put it all together, it's all connected.
It's very cleverly orchestrated. Absolutely.
Correct.
And as you say, the author is the demonic, because it's all about separation, trauma. And I mean, I think there's a couple of points that they really have to make sure of, right? They want to separate the child from everyone and everything that gives it comfort and security. They want to starve it, not just physically, but also of love and affection. And I mean, I've heard horrific stories from previous survivors that I've spoken to, that they would starve the baby and then they would give it a bottle of not milk to drink. And I'm not even going to say it. Okay, it's blood. They would give it a bottle of blood, because that, so that's part of that ritual abuse. And then, of course, give as much metal into the body as possible. So aluminum, stuff like that. So
definitely.
And I think that's probably, I know there's a couple of things that they really make sure. And pain, of course. They create physical pain, not just starvation of love and affection and a food, but they will traumatize the child and the mother. I mean, a lot of these babies that are still in womb from these high-level hierarchy survivors, I mean, those mothers are traumatized. I mean, to the extent that, I mean, the mother will lie there, the baby's butt maybe not even 2 millimeters big in the egg yet, so to speak, and the mother's being traumatized. And part of what they're doing is they will tie clamps to her nipples and they shock her and her fingers and her toes, and the mother gets shocked. So immediately they're creating trauma and pain from before that there's even a thought consciousness within that child. So all that child knows is pain and trauma. And for a child to come back from that at the age of 40 or 50 or 20 or 10 or whatever it is, it's very far gone. And there's no lack of love. And it's all about lack of love. So these are often the kids that are going to end up staying in the system because they know nothing else. And they then perpetuate these horrific practices. And the system doesn't just mean USRA. The system is, I mean, like, you were in the system. If your biological dad was there, you were part of that system. Anyway, very glad that you've come through it, Kerri. And I mean, I'm just looking at a lot of comments.
And I was getting exhausted there for a while. Didn't think I'd make it a few times, but I'm really grateful.
Well, we're very happy you're here, girlfriend. We're very, 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 very happy you are here. That's for sure.
I'm going to hang around for a while and keep stirring and keep pushing a few buttons. And, I think it's really important to expose, the truth of forced adoption and the impact and the trauma. And because I know that by telling my story, there are many more adopted people out there that will find then their voice and start speaking up and getting some healing. And it's so important,
Absolutely. And again, I want to say too, I mean, and I can see in our comment section, there's quite a few people that have been adopted. So we would love to hear your story. Honestly, if you want to share with us, we would love to have you as a guest on our show. You can contact myself or Kerri. Kerri, I'm sure people have your details, but you want to just give me your contact details again. I'm just going to put it here in the comment section.
What would you like?
Email address, I think, is easier.
Email address? Yep. It's KEZADOPT, KEZ, adopt, ADOPT, at gmail.com.
Okay, so that's caresadopt@gmail.com. So if any of you are interested in wanting to have a chat with us or to contact Kerri, you can contact me as well if you want to talk about your story. Really, this to me it's like, in the beginning, and I think I can't remember if I said it on or off air, so forgive me if I'm repeating myself, but I know we did speak about it earlier. It's really about giving this. When we started our channel, right, one of the first things we did was just give all the survivors a voice. You don't have to be famous. You don't have to come from a royal family. You don't have to have been abused by the royals or the presidents or whatever. Doesn't matter what you've experienced. This is a platform for you to speak. So that's I found that was very healing for a lot of people, and they found it too. And it's amazing after a couple of years to see how many of them have now actually got their own podcasts going as well, interviewing survivors as well, in that way. So it's amazing to see how that has spread. And I want to see that as well in this adoption community, because as we say, there's so many people that are not speaking. They hold that very tight in their chest, not realizing how this has affected them. So, and especially for people around.
Yeah, I know the best thing that I ever did was push through and speak up. Like that was the turning point for me. Even though initially I was absolutely terrified and thought my life was going to end, when I realized, oh, nothing happened to me. I went forward and I went public, and I just want to let people know that the first time I did a YouTube interview was with you, Chantel, and thank you. And I expected it just to be a one-off, and I was very, grateful that you've invited me to keep coming back, because
absolutely.
I think you discovered that it's not just like, an hour or whatever story. This is huge. We just keep digging and digging and digging, and there's more and more and more coming all the time, and it's greater understanding around it. And so I just want to encourage anybody that feels that they would like to share their story. We can support them to do that on your channel, Chantel, and hopefully give inspiration to other people to do that.
I would love to see us actually form a community, yeah. And so let's you and I chat at some point about how we can do that. And any ideas from our viewers would be welcome as well. Just to form a community where people can talk and share. And even if they don't want to go public, just form a community. I mean, I know there are lots of adoption Facebook pages or whatever, and that's very helpful.
Yeah.
But let's see what we can do. We can never have too many of these things. It's how we stay connected and stay tuned in. And wow, on that note, I know we've gone way over, but I didn't really care.
That's right. I'd just like people to know I have that Facebook group, Association for Adoptees. If people would like to connect with other adopted people, it is a private group. So it's Association for the numeral 4 Adoptees Facebook page.
Association for numeral 4, right? Association for, yeah.
Yeah. So
adoptees.
That's just for adoptees, because that gives you a private group that's not public, and it gives you space to share amongst other 4. No, numeral 4.
But is that sorry guys, not okay. Sorry. I was having a blonde moment. I'm not even blonde.
Yeah, if you know anybody, you can send them over there. I have people from all around the world on there, and we post, regular things. People can tell their story through there, and sometimes I have some live. So I let people know we're having a little meetup and we have a chat. I also meet people in person. We have lunch together every now and then. So if you're living in the Brisbane area or Sunshine Coast area, we sometimes get together and have just a very informal little lunch. So, I can stay connected through Messenger through that way, or on the group page. So, so you can meet me in person if you like, or you can get involved in the Facebook group, and you don't have to say anything. You just come in and see the posts and see the information out there, and see the stories from other people around the world and what they're doing and what research may be available, and the lobbying that we're doing. Also in Australia, we often advertise when one of the states is having an anniversary event around former forced adoptions. So, you know, that's a really good group to get involved in. And we're very protective in there. So we make sure that everybody's safe, and we have to specify it's just for adopted people only, because many adoptees find it very difficult to speak publicly because their adoptive parents or family are still alive, and they often get quite terrified of ridicule, and so this is why we stay silent. So I created a private Facebook group for people to go in there and be able to say what they feel about their adoption experience.
I think that's so helpful. So there we go. Sorry, Association 4, not Roman numerals, adoptees on Facebook.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, guys, it's so wonderful to have you all hanging out with us and talking about things that are important. So thank you so, so much. And it's Friday. So I wish you all a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful weekend, and look forward to seeing you on Monday. Take it easy, guys. God
Thank
bless
you
all.
Thank you for the lovely comments. Thanks for the great comments. It's the first time I've been able to see them all because I haven't had a very good laptop, and I've got a computer with a great big screen, and I can now see what people are saying. It's great. Thank you.
You're looking very comfortable, I have to say.
Oh yeah. After my horrific migraine today, I'm firing all 4 cylinders now. I'm feeling good now, Chantel.
Isn't that amazing? Because Kerri had a migraine this morning, so she was saying, I'm probably not going to be using 100% of my brain power. I was like, yeah. And now talking is healing, okay? If you have a migraine, talk.
Yes. Yeah. Okay.
Indeed.
Thank you, Chantel. Appreciate it. And we'll catch up soon.
Indeed. Okay. Cheers, guys. See you soon.
Bye-bye.